that you can all see that. Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Deryn Davidson. I work for CSU Extension. I'm the Sustainable Landscape Specialist. For a long time, I was the Boulder County horticulture agent. And so I've been in the Boulder County area for quite a while. And about a year ago, moved to this state level position where I get to support all kinds of people in doing really sustainable landscape practices, which is awesome. And I love getting to partner with Resource Central. So thank you so much for having me. So we are going to be talking about design and plant selection. Here's sort of the agenda or the outline. First, we're going to talk about what is Waterwise and why is it a good idea. I'm guessing most of you already know, but it's good to review these things. We're going to talk about what is design. So design is a huge topic. You know, it could be multiple webinars, and we're kind of just going to scratch the surface of what that is, but I'm going to sort of hit the major points of things that you need to be thinking about depending on where you are in your design process. And we're going to go through step by step on what those are. And then we're going to cover plants. We're going to talk about some sort of how to choose plants, and then I'm going to provide some actual plant options. We'll talk about irrigation and mulch options. Like Kaylee said, we will break for Q&A. So as you have questions, you can feel free to type them in, and then when I break, we'll kind of filter through those. So first thing we're going to do is interactive. I'd like to know something from you all. I want to know where you are in your design process. So Kaylee's going to pull that up, and it should pop up in front of you. I can see it now. Hopefully you all can. So where are you in your design process? I think you just click on A, B, C, or D. You're just getting started. Maybe you're totally overwhelmed, don't know where to start. Maybe you have things mostly designed, but you're still looking for new ideas. Or maybe you're actually going to hire somebody else, but you still want to understand the process. So if you'll go ahead and click on those. And I'm not seeing any results. Are you, Kaylee?
Yes, yeah. We have got nearly everybody answered, it looks like. Looks like 39-40% are A, just getting started. We've got about 25% sitting at totally overwhelmed and don't know where to start. About 31% at things mostly designed, but still looking for some new ideas. And then the last 5% are hiring somebody else to do the design.
Okay, great. Thank you.
That's nearly everyone answered. So
okay,
90%
good deal.
Participation.
All right, thank you everybody for doing that. So that gives me a good idea of who you are and where you all are. Good, this will be fun. I love talking to folks who are in all of those categories. Hopefully I can provide some ideas for those of you who are well on your way, and then hopefully I can sort of simplify things for those of you who might be feeling a little overwhelmed, because it is kind of overwhelming. So, okay, so first we're going to touch on why is Waterwise a good idea. So first of all, we hear xeriscape a lot. Resource Central has xeriscape programs where there are lots and lots of xeriscape programs and plants and designs out there. It's actually a term that was coined in the 1980s by Denver Water. And a definition here is a style of landscape design requiring little or no irrigation used in arid regions. Now you can see I struck out or other maintenance. Every landscape, every garden is going to require some maintenance, even if you just have nothing but rock, which we'll get into that later. That just all rocks does not mean xeriscape. But even if you just have rocks, weeds are going to grow in those rocks, so there's always going to be maintenance. But we're really focusing on the water, so we're requiring little or no irrigation, and really in our arid regions. There's been a lot of state legislation passed over the last couple of years that have to do with xeriscaping, water use, what we can do in our yards, what we can't do, turf conversion things. And I just want to bring your attention, there is one a House bill that was passed in 2019 that actually encourages the use of xeriscape in common areas. So if you're in an HOA or you know, a neighborhood where there is common area, basically, the use of xeriscape and other drought-tolerant landscaping is allowable. So there was a period where people were sort of worried that that xeriscape was going to just be, again, nothing but rocks. And you do have to, with this bill, you do have to live up to a certain aesthetic standard that's written into it. But we are allowed to use xeriscape principles and designs in our landscapes. So again, why is Waterwise important? So global urbanization. We've got a lot of asphalt. We've got a lot of sidewalks and buildings. Over half the world's population now lives in urban areas. So as of 2008, 2009, that scale tipped. Up until that point, most of the global population lived in rural areas. Now over half live in urban areas. And with that comes infrastructure development, right? We're creating these spaces for us to live, to get around. We're paving over habitat, we're paving over open ground. And that means we're putting a lot of impervious surfaces on the ground. And we don't want to be then having to apply lots and lots of water, particularly in the arid West. We don't want to have to be applying all of this water onto our landscapes. Approximately 3 to 5% of land remains undisturbed habitat. That's globally. And this is the doom and gloom piece, but I promise we're going to get into the solutions. Another pretty staggering stat is that with wildlife habitat loss, we're losing about 2.2 million acres a year worldwide. And to put that into perspective, Yellowstone National Park is about 2 million acres. So we're really changing the landscape. We're really changing things. So we want to be conscientious about, how we're designing, how we're doing our landscapes, and then how much resources we have to put into our landscapes. We live in a semi-arid environment, again, particularly along the Front Range. We're mostly in urban areas. And historically, we put a lot of fresh water that could otherwise be used for drinking, cooking, bathing outside on our landscapes. Along the Front Range, we do about 50% of municipal freshwater, and a lot of that is going to turf. So anything that we can do to help mitigate that and use less water is going to be a bonus. So urbanization, it really alters the water cycle of a watershed. And I think this is an important piece just to kind of have in the back of your mind. So what this image shows is, if you look, I don't know if y'all can see my cursor, but if you look on the left, we've got woods or zero impervious surface. So nothing that's stopping water from infiltrating. And in that scenario, or the other one, an open meadow, if we get about 3 inches of rain, about half an inch of that is going to run off, and 2.5 inches is actually going to infiltrate, percolate into the soil and get into our groundwater supply. If we move all the way over to the other side, the urban business district on the right side of your screen, it's the reverse of that. So about 2.5 inches is going to run off, and just 1/2 inch is going to infiltrate. And that's just because we don't have very many areas where the water can make it into the ground. So what happens when that 2.5 inches is running off is it's picking up all kinds of pollutants and nasty stuff from driveways and streets and gutters and things, and it goes directly into our stormwater systems. And our city infrastructure and even towns are basically designed to kind of get rid of water as quickly as possible because we don't want flooding. But if we can start to shift that with our landscapes to where we're actually holding the water on site, and I'm going to get into this a little bit later when we talk about rainwater harvesting, then we're actually keeping the water in the water cycle, and it gets cleaned by all kinds of microbes and good things. It gets cleaned and goes back into the water cycle in the watershed. So it's a net positive. A quick mention about urban heat island effect. So this isn't so much about xeriscaping, but it's just about green spaces in our urban environments. So the urban heat island effect is when cities and towns that have lots of materials with high thermal mass, so think big brick buildings and sidewalks and streets, they absorb all of the heat throughout the day from the sun. And you can see on that image there where it's yellow and red, it gets really hot. And the way a natural system is supposed to work is at night, the area cools off. But in an urban center kind of area with a high urban heat island, all of the heat that was absorbed during the day re-radiates back out into the environment, and it just makes the whole space hotter. Buildings don't respire, they don't evapotranspirate like plants do. And that's why the spaces cool off at night, is because these plants are evapotranspirating in the evening hours. So believe it or not, Denver used to have the third highest heat island in the country. It no longer does. When I was describing that, you might have been thinking of like Las Vegas or Phoenix, and that's where my mind goes to. But the deal with urban heat island is that what you're looking at is the temperature difference from the downtown hot area to the rural areas. So you can see this gradient. And if you think about Denver, directly to the west, we go really quickly up into the mountains where it's much, much cooler, or towards the east out into the plains. And so there's a big temperature difference there. So that's why it sort of seems a little bit skewed. It doesn't mean that Denver is the hottest area. It just has a high urban heat island effect. So Waterwise gardens, when we're really focusing on plant choice and how much water we're using and taking all of these different things into consideration, we're really helping the ecology of a place. And that's going to have a positive impact on our surroundings. We're not just focusing on beautification. So each site is super important. This is the solution. This is the silver lining part, where we can really have a positive impact with our landscapes. So whether it's your home, the school, neighborhood school, a park, whether it's city lands and open spaces, all of these can really, depending on how they're designed and maintained, they can really have a positive impact on the areas around. And I love this John Muir quote. He says, when we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe. So just wanting you to think, you are going to do what you feel is right and good for your landscape in your yard, but you want to be thinking about your neighbors and down the street. And, if everybody can kind of be getting on board with these more sustainable practices, it's going to have a bigger impact. So with Waterwise Gardens, we're really looking for irrigation alternatives to municipal water. We see this kind of thing all too often. People aren't maintaining their irrigation systems, it's running off. When I was talking about runoff versus infiltration, I was talking about natural precipitation. But when we have this, where we're turning on our irrigation systems and then just all this water is going to waste, this we really want to try to avoid. So again, I mentioned that xeriscaping does not mean zero-scaping. A lot of very well-intentioned people still call it zero-scaping. It doesn't mean just rocks and no plants. We're not going for this. We're going for this. So this is a xeriscape. You can even see there's a little bit of turf in there, but the area that is not turf, it's designed in such a way that the plants are xeric. They don't require a lot of water. They have a nice layer of mulch. Lots of different things that go into xeriscape. Here's another example. You can see they all have a slightly different aesthetic, but we're really paying attention to plant choice, our mulch, how much irrigation things need. Here's a really beautiful one. You can see the flat irons in the back. And then this is sort of a cheat because this is the Waterwise garden at Denver Botanic Gardens. Absolutely beautiful. But these things really can be attained. We can accomplish these. We can have beautiful gardens that don't use a lot of water. Okay, so now getting into design. What is design? Really, it's how we're creating our outdoor spaces, right? So we're making plant choices, we're figuring out where we want our hardscape to go, we're looking at irrigation systems and how we're going to support the plant life. And it can be DIY. Oh, I have that backwards, DIY, or you can hire a professional. Even if you are hiring a professional, I think it's really important that you kind of understand the process and you understand what they're going to be thinking about, because you're going to have a more fruitful conversation with them and be able to work with them a little bit better if you have a good understanding of what you want before you get going with them. So I think it's really important to know that design can be taught. There are certainly some people that have more of an artistic flair than others, but it's definitely something that can be learned. When I went to school for landscape architecture, I did a master's of landscape architecture, and most people that earn an MLA are doing a career change. So they're coming from IT and tech, or maybe fine arts, or something completely different. So it can definitely be taught. You just have to have the tools and the strategies. It's like anything else. It's really important that you remember you're working with dynamic systems. And so you want to have some patience and some grace, not only with the landscape, but also with yourself. But it's different than other art forms, right? It's different than painting or drawing or photography. But you're still using a lot of those same principles. I used to work at a botanic garden in Austin, Texas, as a horticulturist, and I had a volunteer there, and every season, sort of at the start of every season, right about now, he would always sort of gather the volunteers and remind us that gardening is the slowest of the performing arts. And I just thought that was so appropriate. You have to, you can design things out, but then you have to kind of watch what unfolds. You're going to do your best to pick your plants and put them in the right place. But you're not going to really know how it looks until that shrub has time to mature and flower, or your perennials come in, or whatever it is. So, but when we're designing, we want to systematically consider all aspects of the land, of the environment around you. Again, growing and changing plants. Who's going to use the space? That's super important. And then, of course, the ecology of your site. So you just have to put on different hats. So your designer hat, ecologist, horticulturist, entomologist, and your homeowner hat. That's the piece where it can feel kind of overwhelming. You don't know where to start, but I'm going to try to break it down for you a little bit. So the first thing you want to do is a site inventory and analysis, and I'm going to get into a little bit more detail on that. But you need to know what you have before you can make any changes. So you go through a process, and you look for opportunities, you look for challenges, you sketch things out. You also want to look for inspiration. You need to know what you're after, what your likes are, what your dislikes are. You might have a really clear kind of style or aesthetic you're going for, or you might just have a couple of plants that you really like. But I always recommend that people look online, look at magazines and books, and maybe most effective is look around your neighborhood, find other yards that you really like and are drawn to, and kind of take some notes and see if you can apply what you're seeing and what you like. So that's kind of for how things look. But then you need to have your goals and objectives for the space. So you have your style, but then you need to know what it's going to be used for. So if you have a really large yard, maybe you're going to have a couple of different spaces throughout the yard. If you have a small yard, then you need to be really efficient with your design. So, are you going to have an outdoor play space? Do you want it to be calm and tranquil? Maybe you're all about creating urban habitat, supporting pollinators and songbirds. You might have pets. You want to plan for them, right? You don't want to say, okay, I've got this whole beautiful design. It looks great to me. And then you let the dog out and it just gets trampled. Well, that's not their fault, right? We didn't really plan for them. So anyway, there can be multiple uses in a given landscape, and you just want to think through these things. So this is really the beginning of that design process. I say, next step is just to design. Easy peasy, right? Not necessarily, but it is really important to take the time to think through things, and you're going to save yourself some headache down the road. So now we're going to go through a little bit site inventory and analysis. A lot of times what happens is analysis paralysis. So people think, okay, I went to the webinar, I need to do a site inventory and analysis. What does that mean? I don't know what to do. Well, we want to definitely get rid of analysis paralysis, and we want to look for opportunities and constraints. So an opportunity might be, maybe you have a mature tree that's really beautiful, and you want that to sort of be like the shining star of the landscape. And a constraint might be where you have an AC unit, or you have this one spot where you have to put your trash cans. And you can design around these things so that they're either sort of screened or whatever, but at least taken into consideration. So just, look around your yard, different times of day, different seasons, if you have that much time, looking for opportunities and constraints. Of course, excuse me, you want to pay attention to the climate. So meaning, you know, is it hot? Is it cold? You know, where do we live? What zone are you in? Exposure, that sun, do you have mostly full sun or are you in full shade? That's these sun and shade patterns. If you look here, this is really key. You can really play with this actually a lot. So for example, if you look at the bottom towards the right, early morning, you know, pay attention to what you're getting there. You're going to have really nice bright sun, but that's in the wintertime, right? And then if we look at the above that, and during the summer, all of those deciduous trees are going to have all their leaves, and you're going to have more shade. So when you're looking at sun and shade patterns, it's really a lot. It's for deciduous trees and evergreen trees and where those shadows are going to be cast. But then also microclimates, and we'll get into that a little bit later, but like what side of the house are you planting on and that sort of thing. Water, of course, you want to know where are your low spots? Can you have an irrigation system? Can you not? The topography, do you have high spots? Do you have low spots? What kind of soil do you have? Super duper key. And then microclimates, I mentioned that. So a microclimate is basically its own little climate within your site. So for example, the east side of your house is going to get that nice gentle morning sun, whereas the west side of your house, if there are no trees or anything, is going to get that blast of hot afternoon sun. And different plants are going to be able to handle those different microclimates. It really helps to create functional diagrams. So what I mean by that is you sketch it out a little bit. You don't have to be an artist. Nobody else has to see it. It's just for you. But there's something that happens when you put pencil to paper and kind of sketch things out a little bit. It helps you kind of process what's going on instead of trying to hold it all up in your head. So you can see that dark line that's kind of in the middle of the drawing there, that's the footprint of the house. And then the dashed line around the edge is the property line. And then they have existing vegetation, right? That's what all the big circles and the little circles are. And then they just have notes: keep existing tree, remove old plant material. You know, we've got a high sun area, we've got a shady area. So again, just sort of methodically going through and making all of these notes is really going to help you figure out where plants can go, where a patio might go. The worst thing that can happen, not the worst thing, but things that happen that are unfortunate in landscape designs is somebody might say, like, I really want this patio right here because I can sit in the afternoon and have a beautiful view of whatever. And so they put the patio there, but they didn't realize that, oh, gee, it's actually way too hot to sit there in the afternoon when I thought it was going to be lovely. And so we never use that patio. So it's things like that that you want to think through. So again, putting pencil to paper, it really will save you time and money. I can't stress this enough. Sketch it out. You can have different iterations. You can start one, and if you mess up, you know, recycle it, whatever. Circulation is important. So, you know, where do people walk? Where does the dog, you know, follow the fence line, whatever it might be. And then again, create. So you have the, let me go back to this one. This is your site inventory and analysis sketch or drawing. And then based off of this, you're going to start to say, okay, I want this plant here. I want an open play space there. And try different things out. So in one iteration, you might have the play space here. In another one, put it on the other side of the yard and see how that might feel and work. And I have a friend in Austin when I lived there who she was redoing her front yard, and she had a pathway that had been worn across the front, in the front grass area, sort of at a weird diagonal angle, and she couldn't figure out what it was from. She was like, what is this? I want to get rid of that. I don't know what it's from. She was home one day when the mail carrier was delivering the mail, and they used that path, and she figured out that that person used that path every single day, 6 days a week, and actually wore a path. So instead of, you know, being like, hey, use the sidewalk, she actually put a little gravel pathway in there. It was, you know, no skin off her back. She was able to work it into the design. And that person really got a kick out of it. They had their own little path. So again, just looking at all these things, looking at the uses, the circulation, who's using it, how are we doing this? And then you're going to create your final design. So you might just be thinking, I'm just redoing a corner planting bed. That's as much design as I need. I just want planting plan ideas. But if you are incorporating actual hardscape materials, you know, you're going to use all of this for that too. And for the plants, you really want to think through irrigation. So you might have nothing but turf right now, and you're going to convert to more xeric beds and get rid of all your turf. You've got to think through the irrigation, because even xeric landscapes that are designed really well and you pick just the right plants, you're still going to need an irrigation system of some sort, whether that's you outside with a hose or whether it's a drip system or sprinklers or whatever you might have. You got to think through that too. So okay, so again, part of our site assessment, we're understanding what we're working with. This is key. We're looking at high spots and low spots and trying to figure out where water flows. So that's going to be really key, particularly if you want to do any kind of passive rainwater harvesting. And by passive rainwater harvesting, I mean not catching it in barrels, but actually using the landscape to catch that water. I'll go into that more later. You definitely want to know where your sunny spots are and your shady spots. And again, that's where microclimates are going to come in really handy. And you can actually play with play with microclimates quite a bit, which is fun. So berms and rocks can be used to create microclimates, maybe really little ones. But if you have a larger boulder, that, you know, the north side of that is going to be cooler and more moist than the south side. And then of course, walls and structures and things are going to create microclimates, but it is really fun to have, to kind of play with microclimates, especially if you're really getting into plants, because you can really kind of stretch some of the plant palette. Okay, so this is going to be also part of your site analysis, and it's soils. You really need to know what kind of soil you're working with. We can always amend soil. You know, people often think, oh, I'm going to garden. That means I need to bring in some compost and rototill it in and make this nice rich soil. Well, it depends on what kind of plants you want to plant. So if you're leaning more towards xeric and native plants, they're not necessarily going to need that really rich soil. So you want to know what you are starting with, what you're working with, because it's much easier to match your plants to your soil type than it is to match your soil to the plant type. So I'm guessing many of you have heard right plant, right place. So that is absolutely true. And most of the time people are thinking about sun exposure and water, but soil is super key too. So if you do a soil test, they're really easy to do. You can do them yourself. You send the soil in to be tested. There are a couple of different labs that you can contact. CSU has a lab at the Spur campus, which is in Denver. There's also one called Ward Labs. And if you go to the websites, Google it, go to the websites, and they'll have instructions on how to do it. They usually cost about $35, $40, and it's definitely worth it. The information that you're going to find out is you're going to learn the texture. So is it fine, medium, or coarse? What percent clay do you have? What percent silt? What percent sand? Most front range soils are either sandy, pretty well drained, or super sticky clay. Both are pretty tricky to work with. Of course, there's always stuff in between. Clay is really dense and it doesn't drain well, so you're going to want to really pick the right plants for that. And then sand, of course, is very porous and it dries out quickly. So sort of the sweet spot that people always think of as the best the best soil is a loam. Right there, you can see that sort of tan color. Sort of a loam or a clay loam is a really nice soil. But like I said, usually what we end up with is like rocky, sandy, or clayey, somewhere in between there. But key to understand your soil. So in your typical soil test, you'll also learn the organic matter content. So you'll get a percentage there. And again, if you're growing vegetables, you want to have a good amount of organic matter. So you want lots of compost. Those plants need a lot of that to thrive and grow. But if you're growing really xeric plants, they're not necessarily going to want that, and it could actually kind of hinder their growth. You'll learn what the pH of your soil is, either alkaline or acidic. Most of the soils in Colorado on the Front Range are pretty alkaline. So they're, it's pretty typical to have 7.5, 8 on the pH scale. And again, that's going to determine what kind of plants are going to like to grow here. If you're somewhere like the Pacific Northwest or back east, where you can grow things like blueberries and rhododendrons, they like really acidic soils. We're not going to have as much luck with those kinds of plants. So we want to know what we have there. You'll also learn what the salt content of your soil is. This is typically not something that's a big deal for people, but when this is a picture of a leaf that from a plant that has salt damage, if you have high salts in your soil, then that's something that you're going to need to deal with, because you don't want to put all these nice fresh nursery plants into soil with high salt content, because they're probably not going to do very well. You'll also learn nutrient levels, so NPK, the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and they'll often give fertilizer recommendations. You mark down, like, either I'm doing a landscape, I'm testing my soil for a landscape garden or for vegetable garden, and they'll provide some information on that. So what you will not find out from a soil test is if the soil is compacted, if it's got a lot of weedy competition, if it's been overwatered or underwatered, things like that you're not going to get. You also won't find out if there's any toxic chemicals. Oftentimes we get people come into extension offices saying, nothing will grow in this spot. I think the previous owner must have dumped, a bunch of X, whatever it might be. Say it's an herbicide in the soil and it won't grow. You have to do a specific test for a specific chemical. You can't just say, has there been herbicide here? So that kind of thing is sort of a special case. But what you are going to find out is those general, the texture, the pH, and all the nutrients and that sort of thing. And that is enough information to help you figure out and determine what kind of plants are going to do well in your soil, and if you need to do any of that amending. As far as how often you should do soil testing, it really depends. But if you have a new site, you've never really done any gardening there, that's a great time to do it. Where you have acidic soils, which we do not have, often people will recommend annually. They say do it pretty frequently. But for here, I have 4 to 8 years there. I'm thinking 5 to 10. It's not going to change that much. But if some really dramatic changes have taken place, big construction job, salty soil amendment, something was brought in that you're concerned about, then you're going to want to do it again. But really do it at the start, and then maybe every 5 to 10 years. Or if you're noticing some serious changes, then it's a good idea. Okay, I'm going to pause for questions. I feel like I covered a lot of information there. And I can see these questions, so let me look through them real quick. Somebody asked, what is Denver's current heat island standing? I'm not sure. It's a good question. It was third highest not that long ago. So I think we're still pretty high, but I don't know for sure. I'm looking at edible plant landscaping. Any suggestions? I don't go into that a ton. Excuse me, but there are some really great options. So maybe you could type in there again. I don't know if you're talking about like traditional veggies or other non-traditional plants that can provide food. Give me a second while I'm reading through these. Oh, here's a good one. So somebody says the functional diagram should be future or final state, right? Like what it should be, like what it looks like when everything is fully grown. Yes, correct. So your first functional diagram is what is existing. It's your, it's what's there now. Where's the property line? Where are the mature trees and shrubs and other plants, and how big are they? And then when you go to your actual design of your of your new design, you definitely want to put use the mature size of plants when you're putting those circles on the paper. Definitely do that. Where can we learn about native plants and options? I'm going to cover some of those, and on my final slide, I have quite a few resources for native plants. We're going to get into natives. Somebody's saying, how important is the soil test if you can tell your soil has a lot of clay? Is the nuance important for a xeric garden? If you know for sure that it has a lot of clay and you feel comfortable, then no, you don't necessarily need to do it. But I just think it's nice to kind of get that breakdown before you start. But no, if there's no doubt, and with clay there can often be no doubt, then yeah, you can just proceed. We have 3 tiers in our yard. Should we soil test on each tier? Yeah. So, and somebody else is asking, should I collect soil from different areas that you want to plant? Yeah. So again, when you go onto those websites of wherever you're doing the soil test, it'll kind of walk you through how to do it. Generally speaking, you do want to take soil samples from different areas and you actually combine them. So if you're going to plant like one long side of your yard, then you're going to take a little bit from like that whole 20 feet or whatever it might be. And you really only need to send in about 2 cups, I think. So it's not that much soil, excuse me, but you collect it and you kind of mix it up and then send it in. So for the person with the 3 tiers, if the 3 tiers were there before you moved in, if you didn't put those 3 tiers there, then I probably would, just because you don't know if they were treated, drastically differently. It's going to start to get expensive to do that many, but it might be a good idea. And it's, so often these questions the answer is it depends, because everything is so site specific. But definitely, yeah, definitely consider that. Okay. Let's see, I'm going to answer one more. I'm going to get into some more plant stuff. Somebody's asking about invasives, but some good questions about soils. Where did that go? Let's see. How would I match a plant's needs with the result of a soil test? I'm not sure how to find stats on a plant species and its needs. Okay, good question. So, right, I said it's much easier to match a plant with the soil type. So usually in a garden center on a plant tag, or if you do a little research, it's going to say likes well-drained soil or can handle clay soils. So it takes a little bit of time and a little bit of research to figure that out. Ask the people at the garden center or wherever you're buying your plants. They should know. And a lot of our plants, especially native plants, can handle some of these tougher soil situations. But yeah, ask questions and do a little digging, do a little research. Oh, I see one more that I want to answer because it's about site analysis. What considerations do we need for high wind with respect to site analysis? So high wind is definitely a huge factor. You might be thinking that through in that it's going to really dry out your space, or you might be interested in putting up trees to have sort of a wind block. So it's going to create microclimates. So depending on which way your home faces and which direction the winds come in, it's definitely going to play a role. So just noting prevalent wind direction, I think is key. And then sort of designing around that. Like you wouldn't want to put, I don't know, I keep thinking patios for some reason. I don't know why. But you might not want to put your patio right where, you get these huge blasts of wind, right? So you can do a lot with plant material and wind sort of blocking, but yeah, definitely something that you would want to consider. Okay, I'm going to keep on going. So, and again, I'll try to get to more of the questions throughout this. So turf areas, there's a ton of stuff in the news right now about turf rebate programs, state legislation supporting turf removal, and that is because turf, we do put a lot of water on turf, but I do want to say that in some spots turf makes sense. So some people argue that pets and kids, they don't need turf. That's what parks are for. And that's fine if that's your take. But if you want to maintain a little area of turf for your kids or your dog or whatever, or yourself, then you can certainly do that. But if you're looking at removing turf, there are some sort of starting points that I recommend. So is it a high traffic area where you're getting whatchamacallit, like the mail carrier pathway, is it getting really trampled and not healthy? Is it difficult to maintain for some reason, whatever that might be? Like if you live in Denver and you've got the Denver roll, I just learned that it has a name. If you don't know what I'm talking about, a lot of homes in Denver are sort of built up on this little hill, and at the edge of the property towards the sidewalk, there's this really steep little short hill. It's called the Denver roll. That's a really tricky spot to maintain if you've got turf. So that might be a good spot to take it out. Or if it's too shady, you can see here, this turf is really patchy. A lot of times what happens is in new developments, especially, a tree is planted, sod is laid, the canopy of the tree is tiny, it doesn't shade things out. 15, 20 years later, the tree is huge and the turf is not doing well. And people are struggling to keep it alive. And you can think, well, maybe that's a good spot to remove some of the turf. So really think what the area is used for. Think that through. I love this comic. I came across it forever ago, and I just like to share it because we're certainly talking about, removing turf, thinking about bringing in perennials and shrubs and trees and things that support more systems than just doing this sort of aesthetic beautification. All right, so how do we remove turf? Excuse me. There are many ways. Some are more backbreaking than others. Certainly, there is the Resource Central program. Kaylee mentioned that. If you're not familiar with it, go onto their website and check it out. But then there's some other ways if you just want to do it yourself. You can just stop watering. That one's a little bit hard to believe, but it will eventually just kind of, poop out. It can take a while, and especially if you have Kentucky bluegrass, it can go dormant. And you'll think it's dead, but then you get a rainstorm or something and it'll start to green up again. So that you really have to be patient, but it can work. Not the most efficient way to do it. Solarization is an option. That's where you take clear plastic, not black plastic, but clear plastic, and you lay it down, and you lay either boards or bricks or stones or something to have really good contact so that there are no air pockets or how do I describe it? Just so that it's like really sealed off. You don't want any kind of airflow under there, and you basically cook you're creating like a greenhouse, and it gets really hot, and you basically cook the turf. And people around here have really good luck with that. People do get concerned about, because it gets so hot, about killing the soil microbes. But what tends to happen is they recolonize once you pull that off. They sort of move back up and rebuild themselves. So people have good luck with that. There's also, you can do newspaper layers or cardboard layers. Excuse me. You want to have a nice thick layer though. And again, you're just sort of smothering that turf. Sunlight can't get to it, and it just it takes some time, but it dies. Quick note back to solarization. I said clear plastic, not black plastic. There are studies that show that it actually gets hotter under clear plastic. So, and that's the idea. You want to get it as hot as you can. So not black plastic. You can rent a sod cutter where you're actually, you take a swath of the turf and the roots and the soil, and you actually cut it out. Or of course, there's the herbicide option. A lot of people don't want to have anything to do with herbicide. That's fine if that's your choice. But it is a relatively low cost and low labor. So for people that might not have the physical capabilities to do some of these other options, it is pretty cheap, and it's doesn't take a lot of manual labor. Now, once the grass is dead, you can leave it in place, or you can sort of till it under. some people will sort of dig it out and flip it over and then plant on top of that. And then as the grass and the roots decompose, it just sort of builds the soil. But you do want to keep the area moist because that's going to help with decomposition. Like if any of you have a compost pile here, sometimes we have to actually water our compost piles because if it gets too dry, it doesn't compost. So anytime you're trying to aid the decomposition process, you have to bring in some moisture levels. I will say, do not just use gravel. Sometimes people think, I'm just going to dump a bunch of landscape gravel on there. It'll kill the grass and then I can plant in there, but the grass will just grow up through the gravel and then you've got all that gravel on there and then it's kind of a big headache. So some lawn alternatives, if you do like having an area of grass, but you don't want the grass that you currently have, you can convert it to a native turf grass. You can do blue grama, you can do that's our state grass. You can do, you can do buffalo grass. You can do a mixture of those two. There are several cultivars of of buffalo grass that you have to plant by plugs, but they fill in quite nicely. There are several of them actually. A few that I can think of one is Prestige, one is Legacy. You order them, they come in flats, and then you just plant them by plugs, and they fill in pretty quickly. These grasses are not going to take a lot of foot traffic, so you want to be cognizant of that. But some people still like that sort of low growing turf area, but you can do it, have something besides Kentucky bluegrass, but you need to know that it's not going to be that dark green that people are used to. And they're warm season grasses, so they're going to be kind of that straw sort of dormant color for most of the year. When soil temperatures warm up, they're going to green up to their sort of bluish grayish green from about May to maybe May or June to like October. So it's a different aesthetic, but some people just really still want to have that kind of turf look. And then also you can just shrink your lawn. So maybe you're just creating a smaller area. Okay, so part of xeriscaping is planning for water conservation, right? That makes sense. We just need to make sure that we're trying to conserve water. And water harvesting is a great way to do that. I mentioned earlier, we have active water harvesting and we have passive water harvesting. So active is where we're actually holding water in a container to use later. So as of August 2016, rainwater collection became legal. Prior to that, it was illegal in the state of Colorado to collect rainwater for the most part. There were a few exceptions. If you had acreage and a well, something, you could do it. But for most of us living in more urban areas, because of water rights. So if you don't know about that, Colorado is a water rights state. So there are water rights holders. And essentially, this is really dumbing it down. But when rain hits the ground, it's pretty much immediately owned by somebody because that rain is going to make it into the water cycle, into our streams and rivers, and people own shares of that water. So that's why it was illegal to hold any of that water. But in 2016, legislation was passed and we can now hold up to 110 gallons at any given time. And this is a cool thing. 110 gallons isn't a ton, but it's kind of a fun thing to play with and to learn about. There are definitely rules and regulations around it. You can have 2 rain barrels, has to be on a single family home, or it can be a multifamily unit, but has to be 4 units or less. And the water must be used on the same property that it's collected. So again, that's active water harvesting. That's something you can do, but where you can really hold a lot more water and design this into your landscape is with passive water harvesting. So that's diverting water over land to where you want it on site for immediate use. Another way to think about this is soil storage instead of barrel storage. And this is, again, getting back to treating your yard, even if you have a small yard, treating your yard as just sort of as it is meant to be, as more of a functional landscape, and actually capturing that water and getting it to go into the soil. So with passive water collection, you want to slow the water, spread it, and sink it. This can pretty easily be turned into or integrated into our landscape. And we're using gutters and downspouts, which most homes have, swales, berms, French drains, and bioinfiltration gardens. So all of those can kind of be connected together. And I'm going to go into those a bit more. So passive water harvesting, people have been doing this forever and ever. You know, for the most part, people were diverting water to agriculture, to their crops, but basically managing the earth and the soil to help water flow where they want it to go. If you've heard the term retention and detention ponds, that is passive water harvesting. Essentially, it's diverting water to a space so that it can infiltrate into the ground rather than rushing off into the storm drain, or rather than flooding an area. Retention and detention are a little bit hard to remember which is which. You can see here on the top, detention basins have an outlet. Retention basins do not. So they are just meant to fill and then allow the water to infiltrate. So detention basins have an outlet. The way that I was able to finally remember this was if you're in school and you get sent to detention, eventually they're going to let you out, right? Hopefully none of us have ever been put in detention, but it's a way to remember. Okay, so a quick note on swales. So swales spread water horizontally or on contours. Here's an image here. So along that line of trees where you see those gray trunks, there's actually a swale there. And it was used as a sort of design solution, kind of a flooding solution. A bunch of water was sort of pooling by the edge of that building just because the grading was wrong. And rather than sort of coming in and regrading that whole area, they just dug a swale and allowed that water to move through the space. Then it's watering more plants, you get more nice vegetation, and it moves the water to where you want it to go. Here's another example. That gray kind of rocky stream bed is moving water where they want it to go. Here's another one. It can be thought of as like a dry creek bed. A lot of people put those in their yards, but they're not functional. They just put it in because they think it looks nice, but you can actually have something that when it's not functioning, when it's not moving water, it does look nice. But then when we get a good rain, which happens not all the time, but it does happen, we're actually moving that water where we want it to go. Berms are raised areas and they're designed to slow water down. So swales move water, berms slow water down. So they fill up and then water sinks down in. It's important that the transition between the existing grade and the slope of berm should be gradual. You can see the image on the top. You can see it's a pretty sharp angle. Kaylee, can you just tell me, can you see my cursor as I'm moving it on the screen?
Yes. Yep, we can.
Okay, thank you. So you can see here, it's a pretty sharp angle there. If this is our berm and water is going in, it's going to sort of undercut that and it's going to cut out that soil. Whereas if you have a nice smooth transition like that, you don't want that, you want that. It's going to fill slowly, and then all of this water here can just sort of sink into the ground. And I should note, it's not going to look like you have speed bumps all over your garden. It can definitely appear as a natural part of the landscape. French drains is next. Most people think of these as they're like, they're having flooding issues or, something, trying to move water away from their foundation. Oftentimes they are used for that, but they can actually be used as water harvesting features too. And this is where you're taking water from your roof, gutter, and downspout, and you actually go below grade, you can see on that bottom picture there, to a perforated pipe where you want the water to release. So there's a cross section of that. So the pipe actually is below ground and then it lets out. There's another image. You can kind of see what that is. Just some more images of that going in. Okay, and then bioinfiltration gardens. So these do it all. They spread, they slow, and they sink. And that's basically just a fancy word for a rain garden. So rain gardens are awesome. They're catching on more and more. You can do so much with them. This is a really big rain garden, this one back here. And you can definitely see the depression there. In your home. It's sort of more of a commercial, sort of common space area in front of those apartments there. In your home, again, it's not necessarily going to look like, oh, they have a sunken garden there. You're going to plant it with plants that are going to grow up, and from the top, from the surface or the street or the house, it's just going to look like a garden. But you can see they have this downspout here. Water is letting out, and all of this is planted up. And just think about how much water there that's running off the roof can infiltrate and soak into the ground. So rain gardens, they use plants, soil, mulch, and microbes to slow and treat stormwater runoff. Because again, our stormwater runoff, whether it's coming off the roof, driveway, streets, whatever, they really pick up a lot of junk, and then it has to go get treated. Right, we can do this. It can be treated naturally. They're modeled after natural ecosystems, and they're going to keep water on site. They can effectively reduce heavy metals, nutrients, and bacteria. They protect local streams and lakes. They replenish groundwater supplies, and the list goes on and on. So rain gardens are they're pretty great. And depending on your site, not every site it's going to make sense to have a rain garden, but if you have a low area, if you're on a slope, if you have a lot of runoff, definitely something to consider. And I should say, if you're really curious about this, you can look, you can check out CSU Stormwater Center, and they have a whole manual on how to construct them and how to make those work. So again, if we're designing for water retention and detention, we can do active water harvesting, passive water harvesting, and all of those things can kind of work together. Okay, another stop for questions. Kaylee, I don't know if you've been looking, but are there some good ones? I mean, they're all good questions. Yes. I shouldn't say that. They're all good, but we have a lot of them. So I want to sort of hit maybe a few that are being asked by multiple people, or what do you think?
Yeah. We've got a couple of duplicates. There are a couple asking about white clover and Tahoma 31 as alternative grasses, low dense grass.
Yep. I'll touch on those. So Tahoma 31, people are really excited about Tahoma 31. It is a turf grass that is kind of newish on the scene. It's a Bermuda grass, but it can handle the cold. Low water use, can stand up to foot traffic. So definitely a good option. And I think the Super Bowl, not this year, but last year, the turf was Tahoma 31, so that it sort of got its, I don't know, people were excited about that. But yeah, definitely a good option, something to look into. And then clover, so people are getting really curious about clover lawns, or using clover in place of lawns. It is an option, but I would say it's not going to be super water wise. If you want it to fill in and be like, lush like a lawn, you're going to have to apply water. And something to think about if you have dogs or kids, or you like to roll around in your turf area, it stains, like it grass stains or clover stains really easily, which is just sort of a bummer. So just something to keep in mind. So it's not going to be that water wise. It does provide floral resources for pollinators. But yeah, clover, it's sort of a mix. It depends on your site. But Tahoma 31, people are definitely really excited about that.
Awesome. Some other folks were asking if you can simply overseed with a buffalo grass of sorts, or to replace the existing bluegrass, or do you have to do a removal method first?
No, yeah, you've got to change it out, especially, yeah, if you have a good, healthy Kentucky bluegrass, it's gonna, the buffalo grass is not going to be as aggressive, so you have to do kind of a complete start over. That's one thing with some of our native grasses, they're not super aggressive, and some of our more introduced ornamentals are more aggressive, so you get that competition.
All right, there's another procedure question too.
Mhm.
They asked, after solarization, can you rototill and then add compost, or will solarization kill weeds?
Yeah, okay. So yes, it'll kill weeds. It might not kill some of our really tough perennials, like it won't actually kill like Canada thistle or bindweed. And the reason there is because what we see on top of the ground with those two weeds is a fraction of what's going on below ground. Their root systems are so extensive. And so, yeah, you'll burn off the top, the vegetation, but it'll just come back. And then solarization. So just like if you smother with cardboard or stop watering, yeah, you can till it in, or you can just plant directly in if you're sure that it's dead. The thing you want to be careful with tilling is you don't want to break it up too much, because rototilling can actually kind of destroy the structure of soil, and we want some of those clods to kind of stay together. So you can either dig it and flip it and kind of chop it up, or you can till it, or you can plant directly into the dead turf. And I see one more that I'm just going to quickly address, and then I'm going to keep going.
Yeah, go for it.
I know there are a lot of questions, but I've got a lot more information to cover. Somebody said, just repeat the testing locations. So one is the CSU, I believe it's the Soil Water Plant Lab. I might have those words out of order, but Soil Water Plant Lab, CSU. If you Google that, it should come up. And the other one is Ward Labs, WARD. They're out of Nebraska. And they're more of, they tend to be more of an agriculture soil testing facility, but they do have a garden and landscape option. Okay, so now we're going to get into some plants. And design-wise, when we're talking about planting plan, there are just some things you want to think about when you're thinking about how to do your plants. So you want to make sure that you've got good seasonal interest. Our gardens can be beautiful, I think, year-round, even in the winter. So we want things that bloom as early in the spring as possible, all the way through summer. Get some fall interest, whether that's late blooming flowers or we have leaves that are turning nice colors. And then you can see that bottom left picture there. We leave our perennials and grasses standing. It can look really beautiful in the snow. And then there are also benefits to invertebrates, so insects, pollinators that overwinter in some of those areas. So think about what the plants are going to be doing year round. Of course, we want to think about color. We want to think about texture. I have a slide where I'm going to talk more about texture there. Obviously, water needs, exposure, how big things are going to get. Somebody pointed that out when we're creating our diagram, our design. Make sure you're designing with your full mature size. That's going to be online or on the plant tag. And function. So how do we want them to function? Are we trying to screen noise? Do we live by a busy road? Are we trying to screen out the neighbor's, I don't know, junk pile next door? We can do all kinds of things. And then food, somebody asked about edible gardening. We have lots of plants that are not like vegetable and fruit plants that we can get food from. Or you can actually garden like landscape with veggies. Think about the structure of your plants, tall, short, very structural with their branching or not. And then you want to think about the maintenance. So you want to make sure that whatever you design, whatever you create, you can keep up with the maintenance of that landscape and those plants. Because if you create a beautiful landscape, get it all installed, and then it turns out to be really high maintenance and you just don't have the time or interest, then it's going to be kind of a fail. So if you don't have a lot of time, you're going to want to stick with ornamental grasses, shrubs, trees, not a ton of annuals and perennials, because those are going to be high maintenance. So how to choose these plants? Xeric, of course, we want things to be low water use. Those 4 seasons of interest, like I said, we want to look at color combinations. Believe it or not, you can have plants in a garden that kind of clash if they bloom at the same time. So complementary colors or colors that are on opposite sides of the color wheel are generally going to be what we're going for. So blues and purples or green, reds and greens look good together, that sort of thing. We want that long bloom time, not only for us, but for pollinators. If we're trying to support pollinators, they need things that bloom all season. And then we want to have a variety of heights, bloom shapes, and structures. So you can see this nice tubular flower here would look good mixed with something like this, black-eyed Susan. So you can see that variety is nice, because if we have all things that look like that, that's a little boring. So that's what I mean when I'm talking about texture. So here's an example for you. These are complementary colors. I think that pop of yellow and the sort of violety purple look really pretty together, very complementary. But to my eye, it's a little, I don't know, it's pretty enough, but it's a little blah. Then if we look at this, same color palette, but very different textures, right? We've got those spikes of purple, and then the umbels, it's called, of the more yellowy color. It's a much more interesting look to me. It does not hurt that there's that pop of orange in the back of the lower picture, but even if we didn't have that there, even if you cover it up, still looks better. So you want to think about that when you're looking at your plant choices. Okay, back to spacing. Things grow. We must remember this. Avoid planting things too close to each other, too close to other objects. Think about your driveway, your sidewalk, your power lines. You can see here, if you plant a tree that grows into the power lines, the power company is going to come through and recklessly just hack away at it. They don't care that it's your favorite tree. Same thing here. You don't want to plant a big old evergreen right in front of your picture window, right? It might be a cute little tree when you first get it, but in 20 years, it's going to be huge. So same house, you're going to want to have something more like this, a nice deciduous tree. And then for that person with all the wind, you might be doing something like this, planting a row of evergreens on the north or the west side of your house to block those winds. Resource Central, with their Garden in a Box program, has this great visual where this is what the garden looks like the first year you plant it. It's a little unsatisfying, right? The plants are little, they're really spaced out, but here we have the second year, and boom, look at that third year. So again, really, really important. Can't stress it enough. Be patient. Gardening is the slowest of the performing arts. Let it unfold, give it that time. Because if you pack them in too closely, by the time the third year rolls around, you're going to have all kinds of issues. There's not going to be good air circulation, and things are going to be dying out. So, okay, next poll. Kaylee, if you could bring that up. What are your thoughts about using native plants? Do you love them?
Got it.
Thank you. You love them, you've tried them with maybe some mixed results, maybe you're curious, but you haven't gotten there yet, or like, I hear about them, but you better convince me because I'm not convinced. And Kaylee, whenever you're ready, go ahead and give us the results.
Yeah, I'll give it another couple of seconds here. Looks like we're at almost 80% participation on this one. So far, it's looking like 56% love them, 15% have tried with mixed results, 27% curious but haven't tried any yet, and 2% want you to convince them.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to talk to you 2%. No, thank you everybody for your response. Native plants are huge right now in the gardening world. They're sort of catching on. I'm a native plant person. I think native plants make a lot of sense. It depends on the setting, of course, but I do think there are a lot of advantages. I will say that we just held the 9th annual Landscaping with Colorado Native Plants conference last weekend. It was in Boulder. And we had a sellout crowd. There were almost 500 people there. So people are really getting curious, or have been into native plants for a long time. So here are some advantages. There was a study done in Colorado Springs that showed that water use between traditional and xeric landscapes, you got a water savings that ranged from 15 to 63%. So that's a huge, first of all, that's a huge range, 15 to 63%. But even if you're just saving 15% of the on your water bill, that's pretty significant. I would love to save 15%. So xeric is certainly saving much more water, and native plants often top the xeric plant lists, which is awesome. So there are a lot of plants that are xeric that are not native, and those are good options too, but we'll talk a little bit more about that. The thing with natives is they use fewer resources. They don't tend to need fertilizers and that sort of thing. They typically are very xeric and don't need much water at all. And they support local fauna. So they're going to support pollinators. They're going to support songbirds. And they also celebrate Colorado and the Colorado aesthetic. So we can grow plants from around the world here. It's pretty hard to be a plant here, but we can, with enough water and enough supplements, we can grow a lot of different things. But we also love Colorado, and it has its own kind of beauty. And by planting native plants, we're celebrating that. They can definitely be incorporated into an existing landscape. It's not all or nothing. I think that's really important. And we do have adapted plants. So not necessarily native, but they're not invasive. That is super key. So they're able to thrive in our local climate and soil conditions, but they're not invasive. So the horticulture trade is notorious for introducing plants and they escape cultivation, and then they start to wreak havoc. They push out native plants and create some real issues. So one key thing too, this isn't natives, but you don't want to overplant. So when we're thinking about how many plants and what to plant, we don't have to totally pack things in. From the design perspective, it's okay to have some blank spots. Maybe you have a boulder, maybe you have a little bit of mulch shows through, and then also prioritize plants. So how many trees do we have? How many shrubs? How many perennials? Now, speaking of, we don't have to overplant. Wow, look at that. That is a packed garden. But I don't think this garden is entirely native, though it's close to all native. And just wanted to show this as an example of a very colorful, very full native garden in Denver. If you look at this here, again, look at all the beautiful textures and different colors, and you can see what the neighbors look like. You got your tree and your turf and your shrubs. So this used to look like that, but you can see what you can do with these plants. This is Centennial Gardens in Denver. And this is mostly native plants. It's not all natives, but it's more of a formal planting. So just to show that it can be kind of wild and woolly, or it can be kind of formal. You can do, whatever kind of your aesthetic is, you can do just using native plants. So now I'm going to scroll through some native plant options that do well here. I'm going to go pretty fast because I want to make sure that I get through all of our slides and I'm able to answer some of the questions. But again, this is being recorded, and I can also follow up and send these plant lists if I go too fast. So blanket flower, Gaillardia aristata. Gaillardia pulchella is one that most people are more familiar with. It has a more red petal. It is native to further east, but this one is actually native to our area. So it's native to Boulder, Larimer County, and just sort of more along the Front Range. Blooms all summer long, super beautiful. Really, like, look at that picture where you see the whole plant on the right. That is a tough spot, but it has that really nice wildflower look. Prairie coneflower is another good option. This one will kind of seed out, so you want to keep that in mind. It'll sort of move throughout your garden, but it's beautiful, and it comes in that yellow on the right, or kind of that red and yellow that you see on the left. Blooms all summer, super dry. Excuse me. Scarlet globe mallow, pardon me. It's also called Cowboy's Delight. I'm not sure where that common name came from, but the genus is Sphaerosia, species is Coccinia. This is a really delicate little plant with really delicate little orange petals, but it is tough, tough, tough. You can see on the left there, it's growing just up through some cracked mud. It'll bloom sort of mid to later summer if you're looking for later blooming plants. There are other Sphaerosias that are not native, so it has a different species that come in purple and pink and other colors. But if you just want the straight native, this is the one. Purple prairie clover, I think, is a really lovely plant. It blooms summer and into fall, so a little bit later. And it gets these cones of purple flowers, and it blooms from the bottom up. So on the left there, you can see the bottom flowers have been spent, and you can see the ones where the stamens with all that orange pollen are in the midsection. It has a really pretty kind of delicate airy habit. Fringed sage and so fringe sage is the one on the left and prairie sage is the one on the right. I think it's good to have some things that are not blooming. Again, it's fine to have some space for the eye to kind of rest. And so this is sort of a filler plant. There are lots of artemisias, but these are our two natives, fringe sage and prairie sage. Sulfur flower, Eriogonum umbulatum, blooms late spring to early summer, gets a bright yellow flower. Good for like rock gardens. You can see on the right there, it kind of has that compact, dense shape. And the leaves in the fall will turn a nice magenta color, and they're evergreen. Desert 4 o'clock, this blooms all summer long. And it's covered in these flowers. They kind of look like petunias or calibrachoa. And this plant, it has a deep taproot, and so it doesn't look like it's going to be xeric, but it really is, and it'll kind of trail a little bit, so you want to make sure you have enough space for it. Lead plant, this is a shrub. That picture on the right is a little blurry, I know, but it gets these purple spikes with bright orange pollen, which is a really nice, pretty complementary color. This one, it's a legume, so it fixes nitrogen. It has the nice leaf patterns, and it occasionally likes a deep soak, but again, quite xeric. There's the standard that gets maybe 3 to 5 feet, and then there's also some dwarf varieties. Poppy mallow is a great one, also known as wine cup. Again, this sort of trails, gets covered in those magenta flowers. We have a couple of different kinds of milkweeds. This is showy milkweed. There's also butterfly weed, which is more orange and red. These are great for butterflies. Then we have blue flax. This is a really lovely little delicate kind of wildflower. Blooms all spring and summer. See this one in the trade a lot. Yarrow is a good one. This can kind of spread a little bit depending on your conditions. You just want to keep that in mind, but it's a good butterfly plant. Golden columbine. We have the blue Rocky Mountain columbine, but this is golden columbine, and it blooms late spring to early summer. It can handle a little more shade. And then I just threw in one grass, but there are other really fantastic grasses. This is Indian rice grass. Some other really good ones are little blue stem, switchgrass that likes a little more water, prairie dropseed. There are tons and tons. Okay, quick note on irrigation. So if you have irrigation currently, you definitely want to inspect your controls at least once a month. So this is going to help with water conservation. You want to know if there's a leak or if a head is shooting off in a funny direction. And then, of course, if you're going to install irrigation or change your irrigation system, you want to get a good handle on what's going on. I saw somebody listed, in the questions they asked, is there an easy way to know where our irrigation system is? Like if you moved in somewhere and you're trying to figure this all out, it's really tough. And irrigation is really hard. You can often follow lines, and especially if you get an irrigation professional to kind of work with you and try to figure it out. But oftentimes what happens is people will lay totally new irrigation systems down and just bypass the old one because it's old or they can't figure it out. But irrigation is notoriously tricky, the underground systems. But of course, we only want to water when necessary. So check the soil moisture before you water. We don't want to just set it and forget it kind of thing. You want the soil to dry out a little bit. And again, the right plants will be able to handle that. You want to think about drip, overhead, or hand watering. Do whichever one you can do, to manage your water most efficiently. Drip is going to have less evaporation and less drift than overhead sprinkler irrigation. And you can note those fact sheets there, the CSU fact sheets. Again, if you Google those, how to operate and maintain your irrigation system, and then also irrigation management. You want to get to know your irrigation system. And then hydrozones, this goes back to kind of design and where you're siting certain plants. You want to irrigate by area and not by plant. So you want to group plants with similar water needs together and then irrigate appropriately. So you want to water according to the plant's need rather than watering everything equally. And that takes a little more time to figure out, especially when you're creating different zones in your irrigation system or setting up new irrigation, and then also figuring out what plants you want where. So that putting on all the different hats, there are a lot of things to think about, but if you just give yourself time and kind of go through the checklist and think it all through, it's going to pay off in the long run. And so you don't have to forego water loving plants. Some people say, you know, I have this plant, I love it, I want it. Yes, I'm trying to do natives, or yes, I'm trying to do xeric, but I love this plant. Then if it makes you happy, you should have it. You should plant it. You just maybe want to plant it closer to the house, because then, you know, you're going to see it if it needs water. You can give it a little extra water, or, you know, it's just easier to get water to it. But if you think about hydrozones like this, it doesn't have to be concentric circles, but essentially you're planting in these zones. So higher water use plants maybe by the house. And then as you move out, you have less and less water need. Excuse me. Microclimates, we already talked about this a bit. But layers of plants can create microclimates for the next layer down. And we want to have good verticality. So we want to have ground covers, excuse me, perennials, grasses, shrubs, trees. So we want to have that vertical structure. And then if you plant in blocks or in masses, then we can create shade for the next plant's root system. So you don't want to just put things into categories like, here's the plant, here's the mulch. You know, they can all kind of work together and sort of benefit each other. But a note on mulch, super important. We always want to have mulch, whether it's bark or wood chip mulch, or if we're using a gravel mulch, but it's going to reduce our irrigation needs by as much as 50% because it holds that moisture in the soil. It's going to improve the soil, particularly if you're using a like bark or shredded wood mulch. It's going to protect plants. It's going to inhibit that weed growth. We don't recommend plastic or landscape fabric for a host of reasons. Doesn't work that well. Doesn't really keep weeds down that much. Can actually kind of inhibit water infiltration. People run into issues like that all the time. So no landscape fabric. If you have landscape fabric and it seems to be working fine for you, then just leave it. But if you can take it out incrementally, like maybe as you're redoing a new area, kind of take out those sections and just don't replace it. A nice thick layer of mulch is going to be better. So again, we've got organic mulch, which is wood, bark chips, straw, grass clippings. Mostly around here, we're just using wood chip and bark. And then we have inorganic, that's going to be gravel or rock. What we want to look for is material that won't compact. It's not going to hinder water and air movement. Some of our shredded bark mulches, like gorilla hair, it'll kind of weave together and it actually kind of creates a mat. And it can become hydrophobic, and you'll put water on it and it just sort of beads off. So you want to be careful about that. If you are using one of those organic mulches, you want to pick one that breaks down slowly. So compost is not a mulch, it's a soil amendment. And our mulches are going to help regulate soil temperature and prevent soil erosion. You can apply it any time of year. You're going to want a good 3 to 4 inch layer for inorganic. For gravel, typically about 2 inches is going to be good. But if you really want weed suppression, you actually have to have that 3 to 4 inch layer, which is pretty thick for a gravel mulch. But depending on your site, you can get away with more like 2 inches. This has nothing to do with xeriscape or design really, but just a general PSA because we see this all the time. If you're mulching around trees, do not create mulch volcanoes, as we call them. You can see this, it's piled up high. Where trees want mulch is over their roots, not at their trunk. So a lot of well-meaning people pile it up and think, oh, look, I'm getting this nice thick layer of mulch around my tree. But it can actually kind of suffocate the tree. So you see this kind of flare out here. It's called a trunk flare or root flare. You want to be able to see that on a tree. A lot of gas and oxygen exchange happens right there. And if you pile mulch on it, you'll literally suffocate the tree. And you might not know it for several years. because trees are slow to tell us that they're not happy. So no mulch volcanoes. Okay, quickly on maintenance, I already touched on this a bit, but no landscape is maintenance free. You've got to choose what works for you. So when you're thinking about your plant palette, where your plants are, what kind of hardscape you have, so on and so forth, make sure that you kind of think through what the maintenance is going to be for all those plants. Great to leave perennials up over the winter for pollinators and other wildlife. People say, okay, well then when do I cut it down? Generally speaking, when we have like a week of 50 degrees at night, 50-degree nighttime temps, our invertebrates are going to start flying and waking up and coming out. And then it's going to be okay to cut things down and get rid of the leaves and things. If you absolutely need to do it before that, you certainly can. It's just good to know that a lot of things overwinter in that plant material. Okay, so Waterwise designs. Design it. You got to plan it out. Take the time to do your site analysis and inventory. Think about simple earthworks. How can you capture water on site? It's going to mean that you're watering less and you're helping the water cycle, the watershed. You certainly want to choose plants that are appropriate for your region. Check your irrigation and adjust it as necessary. Super important. All plants are going to need water for at least the first year, maybe 2 or 3, depending on what they are, to get established. Ideally, then you can totally back off on your irrigation. But it's dry here. We've got to have some irrigation. I will say native plants and really, really xeric things can handle those periods of extreme drought. They're just going to look a little bit puny. And then when they do get water, they'll kind of perk up. But it's good to be able to water sometimes. Think about your materials as you're working through your design. And then maybe most importantly, have fun with it. Like, yes, be creative. Yes, try different things, but really have fun with it. You don't want it to feel like a burden or overwhelming. Just kind of pick pieces apart and kind of go through the list and have fun with it. There's this idea of integrated design that I'll just introduce. It's a design strategy that maximizes the potential of a site by creating an efficient design that saves resources and improves the function and sustainability of the site. So we're creating a design where all these elements work together. So it's low water, the plant palette provides habitat, but it also is beautiful to us. We can use trees that shade our house in the summer, block the winds in the winter, runoff is captured in basins and waters our vegetation, so on and so forth. Another way to think of this is we're sort of stacking functions and just having a lighter footprint, but we can make our landscapes be really functional and really just kind of healthy spaces. And I think that's really exciting. We can do a lot, even if we just have a small space. I'm aware of the time. We're just about there. Here are some helpful websites. I'm going to flip over here and say, thank you very much. I don't know if Benjamin Franklin actually said this, but it's a great quote. When the well is dry, we know the worth of water. I think that's absolutely true. And just the fact of thinking through it and making sure that we're doing our part is great. I came back here to show these websites again. Snap a picture of it or write it down, whatever. Lots of good information there. And the presentation part is officially over. It's 7:59, but I'm happy to take some questions if people want to stick around.
Yeah, awesome. Deryn, do you want me to read you some questions, or there are a ton? So up to you.
Yeah. Let's go. Why don't you read me a few, and then what I've done in the past, and I'll ask for your patience with this. Kaylee, if you can figure out, I know there's a way to save all the questions, send them to me, and then I can work on answering them, and then we can send out the answers to the questions, in a week or so. I'm happy to do that.
Fantastic. Yeah.
I do see one question though. What is pretty quickly when describing planting grass plugs like blue gum or buffalo grass? So buffalo grass plugs you got to water them regularly, but you've got to they'll fill in certainly within a summer. So a month and a half, 2 months, something like that. I just saw that one, so I wanted to quickly answer it.
Yeah, there were a couple questions about native plants doing well in clay soil.
Like what native plants do well in clay soil?
Or like generally if native plants can handle the clay soil that we've got
Yeah,
here.
there are definitely some plants that do just fine in clay soils. And maybe I will write down a list of additional resources to that we can send out. But if you go where you see the slide right now, those xeriscaping ground cover plants and garden flowers, those are going to be great xeric plant lists, and they should also say what kind of soils they can handle. So yes, our native plants, there are definitely plenty that can handle clay because we have clay. And so that's, you know, some of them, that's what they like.
There were also quite a few questions about dealing with weeds like bindweed, things like that. Any comments
Mhm.
on that?
Well, so like I was saying, Canada thistle and bindweed, and a handful of others, but those two in particular are so hard to manage because they have these really deep, robust root systems. So there is, if you can be vigilant and you have time and you just continually mow or cut them down, and like never really let them get that big, like if you have a patch, slowly that's going to starve the plant of its ability to photosynthesize, and then it can't keep putting energy into its roots. And it'll slowly over time weaken the plant and it'll die. People have definitely had success with that on patches that are not too established. They're not too big. It can take several seasons, but it can be done. Herbicide is another option. Again, I know a lot of people don't want to have anything to do with herbicide, but if you have a patch of this stuff and you know that you can properly and appropriately do a one-time application and knock it back, then sometimes that's a good choice for you. You want to time those things really carefully. Like example for bindweed, the best time to do that is what I have seen and others is just after the first frost, because the plant is going to say, it signals to the plant, okay, starting to get cold, time to go dormant. So it kind of takes all of its resources from its leaves into its root system. And so it's going to translocate that herbicide into the roots and kill the roots. So those are a couple of options, but really hard. You can't dig them out. I should say that if you dig them out, really the roots go down like 6 feet, and they're just crazy extensive, and you just kind of chop it up into little pieces and then it just grows new plants. So.
All right. Well, maybe we should wrap it up here. I
Okay.
will try to get you the list of questions for sure, Deryn.
Okay.
Just wanted to thank you so much for this presentation tonight. I'm personally super excited to start implementing some of your new design elements. I just bought a house and will be trying to change the landscaping a bit. I hope you all learned as much as I did and feel empowered to start using these methods in your landscape as well this year. Thank you all for attending, and thank you to our partner Lockbuoy for making this seminar possible. Our seminar series this year runs through August, so be sure to sign up for other seminars on our website if you're interested. And then last thing is when you exit the webinar tonight, you will see a survey link pop up. If you have a moment to fill that out, we'd really appreciate it. Otherwise, keep an eye out tomorrow for an email from us with some follow-up resources and another link to the survey. We'd really appreciate your feedback, so please take a moment to fill that out. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great rest of your evening. Thanks, Deryn. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good night, everybody.